Welcome to The Explainer. Today we've got a story for you, one that really gets to the heart of what a democracy is all about. It's about the true power of the people and how, just regular folks can totally change the course of history.
So let's jump right in. Meet Maya Naidoo. She's just 11 years old, living in Johannesburg. And one day, she's helping her mom clean up, and she stumbles across something that's going to completely change the way she sees her own country.
So inside this old box, there's a scrapbook. It's full of newspaper clippings and photos of this young schoolboy. Maya, curious, asks her mom, "Hey, who's this?" And her mom's answer is just shocking. Devastating, really. Maya just can't wrap her head around it. I mean, why on earth would the police shoot a schoolboy?
Well, to get the answer to that question, Maya's about to get a lesson in South Africa's not-so-distant past. And through this history, she's going to learn exactly why it's so important for every single person to participate if you want a fair and just society.
So her mom starts to explain. She tells Maya that not too long ago, South Africa was run by this incredibly harsh system, a system of legal segregation. We're talking about a system where the law itself decided every little thing about your life, all based on the color of your skin.
And that system had a name, apartheid. It literally translates to apartness, which is exactly what it was. A whole set of laws designed to officially separate people into these different racial groups: white, black, Indian, and what they called colored. And by law, these groups were not allowed to mix.
And this slide, wow, this really shows you the grim reality of what that meant every single day. This wasn't just about people having prejudices. This was written into the law. Think about it. Hospitals, ambulances, buses, even where you could live. And the big one, the right to vote. All of it was separate, and it was never equal. It was deeply, fundamentally unequal.
Okay, so this whole system of inequality, that's the world we're in. And it's the backdrop for the story of that boy in the photograph. His name was Hector Peterson. And his story, it's just this incredibly powerful example of what happens when people decide to push back against injustice.
So the government at the time, which was run by the white minority, decided they were going to force black students to learn a new language in school, Afrikaans. Now you have to understand this was seen as the language of their oppressors. Hector and his friends, they didn't want to learn Afrikaans, they wanted to learn their own language, Zulu.
And this is the key thing right here. This was so much more than just a language class. It was a fight for their culture, for their identity, for their very future. So what did they do? The students decided they had to stand up for their rights, and they organized a totally peaceful protest march.
The response from the authorities, it was just brutal and tragic. These kids, protesting peacefully, were met by police with clubs and guns. The police beat them without mercy, and then they just opened fire on the crowd. And one of those bullets, it hit and killed Hector Peterson.
That date, June 16, 1976. That's the day Hector Peterson died. And it wasn't just a day of tragedy. It sent shockwaves not just through South Africa, but all around the world. It really became a massive turning point in the whole struggle against apartheid.
But Hector's death, and the deaths of so many others that day, were not in vain. Sometimes a horrific event like this can act as a catalyst. It absolutely galvanized the movement. It just strengthened the resolve of everyone who had already been fighting for decades to build a new and equal South Africa.
You had groups like the African National Congress, led by famous figures like Nelson Mandela, who were at the forefront of this long, hard struggle. I mean, for years and years, they fought, they protested, they negotiated, doing whatever it took to finally bring an end to the apartheid system. And here we see the result of that incredible fight. After all those decades of struggle, they did it. They succeeded. In 1994, South Africa held its very first democratic election. The nation was totally reborn, built on this amazing new principle that all people, no matter their race, are equal.
So this brings us to a big question, right? What is a democratic government, the very thing these people fought and died for? What does it actually mean for us today? Like, how does it really work?
Okay, so at its very heart, the kind of democracy that South Africans fought for is all about one thing: participation. It's about having regular elections where the people, the citizens, get the power to choose their own leaders, a right that was denied to so many for so long. And those leaders they elect, well, their job is to make decisions that actually reflect what all the people want and need.
And that right there, that's the key. That's the mechanism that makes it all work. Because governments don't get to stay in power forever. They're elected for a set amount of time, and then they have to face the people again in another election. This is what limits their power. It means that at the end of the day, they have to answer to us, the citizens. But participation isn't just about showing up to vote every few years. That's a huge part of it, for sure. But a real, healthy democracy needs more. It needs people to be constantly engaged.
That same spirit that drove Hector and the other students to march, well, it lives on today in all kinds of ways. We're talking about organizing rallies, starting signature campaigns, or even something as simple as just paying attention to what the government is doing and being willing to criticize them when it's needed.
So, here's the main takeaway from all of this. When people make their voices heard, whether it's through a protest or just through public debate, a democratic government has to listen. I mean, they might try to explain their decisions, sure, but they can't just ignore you. Because ultimately, their power comes from the people, and they are responsible to the people.
And that really brings us back to Hector Peterson. His story is just such a powerful reminder that this right we have to participate, it's precious. It wasn't just given to us. It was won through incredible struggle and sacrifice. And that leaves all of us with a final thought, a final question to consider. Knowing the price that was paid, how are you going to use your voice?
So today we're going to dive into the nuts and bolts of how a democratic government actually works. We're looking at one of the biggest challenges any society faces, disagreement. How do we go from conflict to cooperation, and how do we make sure there's justice for everyone at the end of the day? Let's get into it. It really all boils down to this one huge question. We live in a world packed with different cultures, different religions, different ways of life. So how on earth does a democracy keep things from just falling apart? How do we all manage to get along when our needs and our beliefs are bound to clash? All right, the very first piece of this puzzle is something at the heart of democracy, the people's voice. The government isn't supposed to be some far-off, distant thing. Nope. It's meant to reflect what its citizens actually want. So how does that work in the real world? I think the best way to see it is that democracy is basically one long, ongoing conversation. It's a whole system designed for people like you and me to share our opinions, the good, the bad, and the ugly, so that the government knows what's going on and what it needs to do. And that's not just a nice idea. It is literally the lifeblood of a healthy democracy. Now, this whole participation thing, it goes way, way beyond just voting every few years. We're talking about people hitting the streets for rallies and dharnas, organizing strikes when they feel it's necessary, getting thousands of signatures on a petition, and, of course, using the media, newspapers, TV, you name it, to talk about and really scrutinize what the government is up to. These are all some seriously powerful tools for making your voice heard. But let's be real for a second. The playing field isn't always level. Sometimes the voices of minority communities, of Dalits, Adivasis, and women can kind of get lost in the noise or even intentionally pushed to the side. And that is exactly why social movements are so incredibly important. They create a space for these groups to come together, to challenge the way things are, and to demand that their specific concerns are finally taken seriously. Okay, but what happens when all these different voices start to clash? What happens when what one group needs is the exact opposite of what another group needs? Well, this is where that beautiful ideal of participation smacks right into the messy reality of conflict. Conflict is just, well, it's an unavoidable part of living in a diverse society. It pops up when different groups feel like they're being ignored, or even worse, that they're being discriminated against. And if you just let those tensions simmer, they can easily boil over into fear, hostility, and sometimes even violence. And this isn't just some abstract idea. I mean, picture this happening in your own town. Something that seems pretty simple, right? Like the route for a religious procession. But that can turn into a huge point of conflict if one community feels like it's a sign of disrespect. And just like that, you can have fear and mistrust spreading like wildfire. We see this play out on a massive scale with something like the Kaveri River, which runs through both Karnataka and Tamil Nadu. On one side, you've got Karnataka, which needs that water for its big cities, like Bengaluru, and for its farms. But then, downstream, you have Tamil Nadu, which is totally dependent on that same water for its own agriculture. Both states have perfectly legitimate needs, but there's only one river, so major conflict is pretty much guaranteed. So when people or communities or even whole states are in a standoff, who steps in? This is where the government plays one of its most critical roles, not as a boss telling everyone what to do, but as a referee, whose job is to mediate and help find a peaceful way forward. And usually, there's a process for this. First, the government tries to mediate. It gets people from both sides in a room to talk it out. In those local disputes like the procession route, the police are there to make sure things stay safe and don't get violent. But for the huge issues, like that Cavalry River dispute, that's when the central government has to step in, look at the laws, and figure out a fair solution for everyone involved. But a really healthy democracy does more than just put out fires. It actually tries to build a society where those fires are less likely to start in the first place. And that takes us beyond just managing conflict, to the much deeper goal of building a society based on equality and justice. And this right here is a core, non-negotiable principle. Equality and justice, they are two sides of the same coin. You absolutely cannot have one without the other. A society can't be called just if its people aren't treated as equals, and people can't be treated as equals if there isn't a just system there to protect them. You had incredible visionaries like Dr. B.R. Ambedkar who fought tirelessly against injustices like untouchability that had been around for centuries. And their argument was so powerful because it was so simple. Any practice that treats one group of people as less than another is, by its very nature, unjust. So real justice means we have to be completely committed to treating every single person with equal dignity, no exception. Now, what this means is that sometimes promoting justice requires more than just treating everyone the same under the law. When some groups in society have been held back for generations, the government might need to create special provisions to help level the playing field and fix those historical wrongs. And here is a fantastic, real-world example of what that looks like. Think about a society where a boy's education is often seen as more important than a girl's. Just opening schools for everyone isn't enough to fix that injustice, is it? So to promote true justice, a government might step in and waive or lower school fees for girls. That actively helps families overcome that societal pressure and gives their daughters a chance to get an education. And that brings us full circle. A strong, vibrant democracy is really a partnership. It needs citizens who are paying attention, who are participating, and who are holding their government's feet to the fire. And, in turn, it needs a government that's not just interested in settling arguments, but is actively working to build a more fair and just society for every single person. So, as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with a question to think about. We've talked about the system, participation, conflict, and justice. But if you strip away all the laws and the systems, what does a truly fair and equal society actually look like to you? And, maybe more importantly, what's the role you're going to play in helping to build it?